Awesome. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're here today to talk about weeding, which is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. We will go ahead to our agenda. As Kim mentioned, we're going to spend 2 hours here together. When we do this in person, it takes 3 hours, first of all, and we take a break in the middle. So we're not going to take a break. We encourage everybody to go ahead and do your own bio breaks as necessary. Make yourselves comfortable. If that entails like standing up and doing jumping jacks, feel free to do that, right? Because you got to do what you got to do on your end to stick with us and be comfortable. So some introductions. I'm Maria Bernier. I need to update my Zoom entry to say my pronouns are she and her. I work for the Connecticut State Library as the State Data Coordinator and Construction Grants Administrator. And we often talk about our experience with weeding. And mine comes from an academic setting as well as kind of a special public library setting. And in the academic setting, I was responsible for weeding in world history and international relations, as well as purchasing in those areas. So I have a little bit of experience with the kind of a university setting. And then I later on got to oversee an enormous weeding project at a fancy library in Newport that had never weeded in its like 160 something year history. So there was a lot of stuff to get through. And I got to see that kind of firsthand, how that all happened and help with some of the administrative details and the follow through on that. So I will turn you over to Kim to introduce herself.
Hi folks, my name is Kim Poe. I am the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library. My pronouns are she, her, and I have spent basically my entire 14 years working in library services, working in children and youth services. I've worked in every type of library, I like to say, everything from a multi-branch urban library setting in West Haven to a rural affluent setting in Easton to a bookmobile in Ferguson, where I managed the collection there and lots of weeding was required. So I also have 2 screens, so don't mind if I look off. I think we just had a kitty visitor, so while we said we don't necessarily want to hear your cats and dogs, please invite them into the screen. It's adorable and fun for all of us. Hello, kitty. So I have done lots of weeding in my capacity as someone who works within youth services. I also recently have started to do a lot of workshops on diversity audits and building inclusive collections, which requires weeding certain things, adding other things to the collection. Something that Maria and I can now also say with regards to weeding is we spent a couple of months last summer, doing a huge weed of our large print books that used to be housed in Rocky Hill at the Library for the Blind. We've since moved them to where we are at the Middletown Library Service Center. And I want to say we weeded like, I don't know, some shockingly large number, like 30,000, like something completely wild. So weeding isn't just in our past experience as library service folks, but in our present experience now. If any of you have never been to the Middletown Library Service Center, first of all, I suggest you do so. We do let people in by appointment so we can keep track of what's going on, but this is a fully functioning library. You can see some books kind of behind me on the shelves here. We lend items, we receive items, we have our own collection management system that we run through here, which includes weeding the collection. So this isn't just something in the past for us. We still do it. It's still a part of our daily work around when we are consulting for you all. So it's still alive and well in our hearts and souls.
Very much so. So while we're talking and while we're going through our presentation and our yada, 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 we would love to hear from you in the chat. Let us know what issues you're hoping we will talk about over the next couple of hours, because we do this also for you guys. We have done this, Kim and I have done this several times, and we have sort of a regular thing that we go through and kind of a script, and we have our same notes, but we want to make sure it's useful for you too. So please drop into the chat any specific issues you would like us to address. And we're excited. Kim noticed that there are a lot of school librarians in the group this morning, which is fabulous. So we'll try and pick up on some issues that are particular to your situation as we go along, in addition to a lot of the public libraries. And I think we have a couple academic libraries here today. So that's really fun. And then we're just going to talk about weeding, and Kim's going to show us a weeding video at the end, sort of the how-to. So if we were all together in person, we would do it. And instead, we're going to sort of see how Kim does it. So our next slide is to put our weeding in context and to remind you about all of the fabulous statewide resource sharing programs we have in Connecticut that can really support your library and help to supplement your collections. So first of all, as Kim mentioned, we have the Middletown Library Service Center, where we have tons of books and audiobooks and kits and fabulous things that we can lend to your library, usually for extended periods of time, never with any fines. So we have a lot of stuff you can borrow for your patrons. So keep us in mind. Next, there's the Deliver It system, which are those fabulous vans that drive around the state and bring books from public library to public library and academic library and shuffle them all in between. And that really helps to support a lot of our interlibrary loan as well as our borrow it returns. So that is a really robust system that moves our resources around the state. We also have Research It, which are those online databases that the schools and the academics are so familiar with, and the public libraries. There are amazing resources already online that can help support your collection. So maybe you really don't need to keep all those print reference books any longer, because we have some updated electronic resources instead. Also, we've got the Find It and Request It system. So Find It is our statewide union catalog, and many public libraries and academic libraries are contributing their collections to that union catalog, so we can see who has what and who I can borrow it from around the state. And then using Request It or Fulfillment, I can actually request those items to be sent to my library. So again, there's great statewide interlibrary loan support for you. Then, as I mentioned, there's the Borrow It program, which means that any non-resident can walk into your public library and present their hometown library card and say, I would like to borrow something that's on your shelf. And because you're a Borrow It participating library, you lend them that item. And then as you keep track of those and count those over time and submit those numbers to me, your library will get reimbursed for some of those loans as well. So that's our Borrow It program. We don't have a one card really in Connecticut, but instead we have this really fabulous cooperative system. So you basically have access to any public library in the state of Connecticut as a borrower. And we also have our Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, which has now relocated, as Kim said, to the Middletown Library Service Center. And they support readers who are either blind or have a visual impairment or are now print disabled, meaning for whatever reason, they can't hold a book or they can't read the print, and they get signed up and can borrow audiobooks or Braille books free, and they get them through the mail or through download. And it's this really fabulous service. So all of these this entire suite of services and programs helps to support your library, meaning that you do not have to have every book ever published, right? Because somebody in the state of Connecticut probably has a copy that you can borrow, and we can help to facilitate getting that book to you. So that's the context of our weeding conversation as we go along. Kim, how are we looking in the chat?
We're looking good. I'm seeing some of the things that people are mentioning that they're hoping we're going to talk about. And when I tell you we've got a slide for it, we've got a slide for it. We do have some resources on what to do with weeded materials, including a new resource the Service Center has just started to use. So we can actually explain that to you, not just from a hypothetical, but from like an actual use situation. We've actually got some folks who are doing it right now. I see weeding picture books, classics, series, we got it. And some folks who said they've been to the Service Center. So so far we've got you covered. So, but keep dropping those things in. I just let some new folks into the room. Hi, you haven't missed anything. We're just getting started. We would really appreciate if you could drop into the chat some things that you're hoping we're going to address today. So that way, if we don't have a slide built in for it, we can make sure that at the appropriate time we take a minute and we can share some extra information. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and here we go. Less is more. That's sort of what we're telling you all as we go through this weeding process. We want this on this side of the screen, the left side of the screen, not that. And one of the most basic reasons is it's about quality over quantity. You want books in your system that your community wants, that people are reading, that people are using, and most importantly, that people can find. In that image on the right side there, if you go into that looking for the newest Debbie Macomber, like, you're not gonna be able to find it because things are kind of haphazard and all over the place. If you have to shelve one book, you've got to shift everything. I mean, at that point, just throw it all on the floor, quite frankly. It's not helpful to you as library workers who have to manage that collection, and it's not helpful to your community members who are trying to go in there and browse or find specific titles. So we want this on the left, not that, for a multitude of really basic reasons. But I think we can often lose sight of that during the process. So the first thing that we're going to say is that, unfortunately, there's no one way to do this. There's no formula. There's no 2 + 2 is 4. Some of this is going to change community to community, and we're definitely gonna hit some of those specific topics that you all were talking about in the chat. But unfortunately, we're not going to be here to say do this and you're done. There's some nuance to all of this. It's important in your library, facility, school, academic, public, whatever it may be, to have a really well thought out collection development policy. And I'm actually going to change my wording here a little bit and say a collection management policy, because it's not just titles that you are bringing in to your system, it's what happened throughout the entire process. If you're going to be bringing books in as you are developing your collection, things have to go out, or otherwise you're going to wind up with the not that situation, right? And so you want to make sure that your collection development or management policy specifically addresses weeding. You also, as individuals, want to make sure that you're well informed about popular books and authors and just sort of what's going on in the book world right now, as well as what's happening in your community. Certain communities are going to need more types of one material than another. So it's just really important to kind of keep your ear to the ground and keep your eyes open so that you can make sure that you're fulfilling the needs of your community, but also that you're staying on top of what's happening in the book community, because the switch up can be quick. So in addition to that, you're also going to want to make sure that you're really familiar with your library's long range or strategic plan. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 3 years, whatever you choose to do specifically. But it's really important to be on the up and knowledgeable about what those goals are that have been developed for your entire community. Sometimes in those long range or strategic plans, maybe like the collection isn't specifically mentioned, or it's mentioned and it's very vague. So something to do is just sort of like read between the lines a little bit. Maybe the strategic plan or long range plan at your institution mentions wanting to build a better relationship with your local multilingual community. There are some folks that might be experiencing that right now with the influx of Afghan refugees, and maybe that's something that's been added to your long-term strategic plan. So while that doesn't specifically take into account collections, right? Like, no one mentioned books in there, but you can draw from that maybe it's time to sort of look to see if you can get books in other languages. Maybe you want to expand your ESL collection. Maybe you want to get some more like Bob books, right? Like simple reads, because that your community has changed, and things need to change within the library system to address those new community needs. You want to take all of this into account when you're weeding your collection. We're gonna draw the line here. It all ties together, I promise you.
So let's talk about why you would weed. And I realize that I am, in a sense, preaching to the choir because you are here, right? You know you need to weed, and you're learning more about it and how to go about it in an informed way. But you may need some words or some arguments to bring to your coworkers, your supervisors, management, board, that kind of thing. So this is where we talk about the why behind all of this. And as Kim said, it's really part of collection management, right? It's responsible. You balance what you're bringing in with what you're getting rid of. And this is part of the life cycle of the library and the collection. It's a responsible thing that we do. It's our jobs, and we're professionals and we're trained. It also gives you an opportunity to identify some gaps in your collection because you're actually standing in the stacks, right? And you've got your hands on everything and you're looking at what's there and what's potentially not there. So it really helps you with your collection improvement and your collection development. In addition, it's helpful to maintaining the quality of your collection. So remember how libraries are trusted resources, and we are places of facts and authority and truth. And we need to make sure that our collections are still telling the truth about Pluto and other things that have changed over time. So it's really about maintaining the quality of your collection. You want to have something that you're proud of, that you can present to your community, that is really an essential collection. And again, that reminder that your library is not Amazon. You are not a warehouse. You do not have to have everything that anyone could want, because that's an impossible task, right? The Library of Congress does that. Your library is not that big, nor do you have that budget. So just remember, you need to have the collection that is best for your community and what your community wants. And I also talk here about saving a little bit of your collection budget for replacements, because as you're going through and you're weeding and you're deselecting, you may see an item that has been loved to death and you actually want to get a brand new copy of it because it's so popular. Or you may want to get something with a new title, that a new cover image that may be a little more appealing to today's market. So save some money, set that aside for replacements. And so again, the reminder, you're not being irresponsible, right? When you get rid of library property, you know, the taxpayers are like, oh my God, they're getting rid of books. Yeah, dude, I am, because it's my job, right? It is my job. It's my public service to you as a patron to give you the best possible collection for our community, not just one that looks pretty on the shelves, but the content of which is appropriate for our collection. You're not a storage facility, you're not an archive, you are an active library full of life, full of engagement, and that's the image that you want to portray, is that you are not dusty, you are new and vibrant, and you are proud of your collection. So that's why we weed, and that's what you can tell your boss when she asks you. This is a really fun little cartoon that is geared toward academic libraries. And of course you can't see it, and my screen is super tiny, so I really can't see it, but there is a link in our slides, which you will get later on today, and a link also on our LibGuide, so you can find this and blow it up and really read it. But it's a very nice plain language explanation for patrons as to why you're weeding, and particularly in an academic or a school setting. So I encourage you to take a look at that, steal some of that language for your own situation. So the benefits, right? So we talked about the why, but what are the other benefits of this? You're going to save space, right? Obviously, right? You're getting rid of things. You're making a little more room on your shelves, potentially for new materials, but potentially also so that you can market your books, right? Let's put some books face out. Let's do some displays. Let's create some space so we can make our collection a little bit more visually appealing and approachable. You will also save time, both staff time in terms of shelving, right? Like reshelving, like if you have to shift a shelf every time you're trying to reshelve, your collection is too full, right? And you know that, right? So that's a place you would want to target to save your staff a little bit of time when they're reshelving, but you're also saving patrons time while they're looking for something specific or even while they're browsing. So it's a time saver. You will also make your collection more appealing, right? Visually appealing. And we see this ourselves anytime we walk into a store or any other setting. If you walk in and it looks like nobody cares, and it looks like the products are dusty and misshelved and disorganized, that's probably not a place you want to shop, right? So translate that to your own library and make your collections visually appealing and engaging so that people want to use them and want to walk down your stacks and browse. And you might find this counterintuitive, but weeding will actually increase your circulation because people can find stuff, right? And they'll find stuff that has been on the shelf for a couple of years and they'll say, oh, I didn't know you had this book. Did you get all these new books? And you'll be like, no, we just made them a little more appealing and made it so you can find it. So your circulation will likely go up after a weeding project. And as a data nerd, I have to tell you a story I heard from a public library in one of the corners, the northwest corner, about how they weeded their collection, and they looked at their annual report statistics about how that went and studied it. And they said, although they have now one of the smaller collections of comparable libraries in terms of volumes, they have one of the highest turnover rates, which actually means their collection is being used more than collections in larger libraries. And that's what you're looking for, right? Books that are flying off the shelves. So those are some of the benefits of weeding. More benefits. You get to enhance your reputation for reliability and currency. Like, don't we want that? Isn't what libraries are about, right? We want to be reliable truth tellers. We want to be sharing facts with our patrons. So you'll work on that, on building that reputation and building currency, right? Because if your patrons walk in and all the books are 10 years old or 20 years old or a little older, it looks again like you really don't care and you're not really up with what's happening in the world and you're not responding to current needs. So you really want to consider reliability and currency of your collection. And again, as I mentioned, you're keeping up with your collection needs. Where are those gaps? Where do we need to do some mending, perhaps some binding? Maybe we need to set up an ongoing weeding of shabby items. Maybe we need to set up some scheduled weeding in certain areas because they're really tight. So you'll be more aware of those needs and you get those insights on your collection strengths and weaknesses. So lots of benefits and why you would want to start weeding and keep weeding.
Thank you, Maria. So let's talk about the your weeding policy or your sort of addressed weeding section in your larger collection management policy. So weeding absolutely needs to be a part of the material selection portion of your overall policy because again, like we've said and sort of reiterated a couple of times, there comes a point where you can't bring anything else into your shelves if you are not also getting rid of them. So it's really like the completion of a circle. You can't have one without the other. So in your policy, they really should be together because they counterbalance each other. And within your weeding policy or within the weeding section of your overall material selection policy, you need to put down the reasons for weeding, right? So that might be that you choose to weed titles that haven't searched in 5 years, or you are weeding titles that, you know, are no longer correct. We're going to talk about Pluto quite a bit today. Things like that. You want to make sure that you list those because the point of this is that you are kind of beating people to the questions that they might ask you later. You want to put the criteria that you use for weeding, and we're going to be giving you quite a lot of criteria today. So I really encourage folks to dig through the LibGuides page that we're going to be giving you a link for. I mean, I think it's really going to be your bread and butter with regards to the criteria that you use when deciding what to weed. And then this came up in the chat a few times, disposal of weeding materials. We are going to get to all of this like farther in the presentation, but these are just some of the things that you want to make sure are specifically addressed in the weeding portion of your collection management policy. You want to answer these questions before your patrons even ask, or before your first selectman asks, or whatever. You just want to like be able to hand them the piece of paper where they can sort of read for themselves, and they can be like, oh, okay, this is what's going on. They're not throwing out the newest James Patterson. They're throwing out, you know, whatever. Danielle Steele, but the old Danielle Steele. I know some people are still reading the less old ones. I don't know. So we had some folks who asked for it, who said they wanted examples. Here you are, here they are. And again, do not worry, these slides will go to you. I see some folks taking notes. I'm a note taker, otherwise I don't pay attention, so carry on, but you will be getting all of this stuff later. So we're gonna encourage you to hit some of those links and take a look at some of the collection management policies. And one of the things to notice in the weeding portions of their policies is some of the language that's used. So Marie actually said the word one point because we done this presentation so many times, but you'll find in these policies that some people don't use the word weeding because there can be a visceral reaction right within the public. Again, my tax dollars, you're throwing them in the literal trash. So you'll find that there are some people in their policies who use the term deselection. It's like a little classier, a little pinky out. Fairfield County might want to use that language a little bit, or some people use the word maintenance, maintain, because we understand that, right? Like if you want to maintain your car, at some point you're just going to have to buy new tires, right? You know what? You got to get rid of the old tires. You got to put some new ones on. Otherwise, you know, you're not keeping your car running as well as it needs to be. So we understand maintenance in a different way from the way that we understand the term weeding. So these are here for you to kind of go through on your own. And we're just gonna kind of keep powering through here. So there are 3 criteria that we're gonna go over for weeding. We're gonna go over contents. So what type of information is in the book or not in the book. We're gonna go over format, sort of the look of it, sort of what's going on there. And we're gonna go over use. And when we say use in this context, we're talking about circulation. And that's where some of that criteria is gonna come in for you. All right, so the contents. What is in the book, right? Is your material out of date or misleading? So now we're going to say that this might not necessarily, if you've got like an archives kind of, right? If you've got a place that sort of holds on to out of date material on purpose, we're obviously not talking to you. But for you know, the folks who are here, schools, public, academic, is the information misleading or inaccurate? Is Pluto still called a planet instead of a dwarf planet, right? If it's still called a planet, it's time to go. I guarantee you 85,000 new books have been published explaining, you know, what happened. I know one of the questions that we get a lot in this workshop is like, well, don't we want to explain to kids or people like what it used to be? Like it's important to have that. And it's like, well, sure, but we don't want to give them the material that speaks as if it still is, right? Authors and publishers are pretty smart people. So when they talk about the fact that Pluto is a dwarf planet, if it's something that is more recently been published, there will be information explaining that it used to be a planet. And before that, we just didn't even pay attention to it at all, right? So you don't need to hold on to inaccurate material as a way to not erase the past or as a way to like explain the way things used to be. Accurate material can do that in a more intellectually appropriate way. And another recent example that I have been harping on that Maria understands, that this is going to touch base a little bit on, touch base on a few things. So sometimes new things that come in are still wrong. And sometimes you may want to add them or keep them in your collection, but if the contents of the material is inaccurate or misleading, you cannot do it. And I'm going to give you an example of a book that came out this year in 2022 that I still have not added to our collection. Maria knows because I had a fit for about 3 days. This book is beautiful. It is called Your Legacy. It is published by Abrams. It's called A Bold Reclaiming of Our Enslaved History. It talks about sort of the history of Black people, but in a way that's not like sad and depressing that makes you want to cry, in a way that is incredibly empowering. The artwork is to die for, to die for. And you will notice that there is no processing of this book because I have not added this book to our collection because of one thing. And I really want to try to justify ignoring this one thing, but because of third grade Kim, I can't do that. And I'm going to tell you what it is. It is this page. Again, beautiful artwork to die for. But on this page, a page where famous Black people in history are named and their famous contributions to American life, such as Charles Drew, who's responsible for blood plasma banks, and Augustus Jackson, who like created ice cream, maybe, and Madam C.J. Walker and the Black hair care empire, and Sarah Boone, who created the ironing board, which I don't use because I don't iron, but like I used to use it, so I appreciate the fact that it exists. But the reason this book is not on our shelves is because George Washington Carver did not invent peanut butter. He didn't do it. One Google, that's the first thing that comes up when you Google George Washington Carver, is that he did not invent peanut butter. He came up with a bajillion uses for peanuts. And in the third grade, I did a project as him where I wore a white robe and pretended it was a lab coat. And it was a whole big, lovely thing. I love this book. I constantly look for ways where we can explain messy and ugly history to young children in an age-appropriate way and in a way that is empowering to children of that particular background instead of something for them to be ashamed of. And this book does it, and it does it really well, but it has told a lie, and there will be young children who will go home and say that George Washington Carver invented peanut butter when we're pushing them in the cart through Stop and Shop, and it's not true. Now, Abrams may republish it and they may fix that and they may change it to, you know, hundreds of uses for peanut butter. But at the moment, despite the fact that I desperately want to add that book to our collection, I can't do it because there's factually inaccurate information in there. And particularly when we're talking about young children who believe what they're told, I'm not going to be responsible for spreading that mistruth. But, you know, maybe I'll like white out that portion of the book, right? I don't know, like I really want to. And I went to Maria and I'm like, I know we do the reading workshop. Is there any way I can work around this and still hold on to like, you know, my professionalism? No, the answer is no, I can't do it.
And Kim, I want to highlight what you said. Kids will believe what they're told, right? Full stop, period. So that's why we need to have books in our collection that are accurate. And I know that's going to break a lot of people's hearts because you're going to say, but if I weed my collection based on the criteria you tell me, I'm not going to have much left on the shelves. And we're going to say to you, because you need to have books that are accurate, that tell those kids the truth. And if you don't have them on your shelves, you can borrow them from us. You can advocate for some funding. We can figure out ways to help you through that situation. But kids will believe what you tell them.
And quite frankly, so will some adults. My sister was convinced that you could stretch the large intestine around the planet. And I was like, what? But someone told her that, and she's an adult, she's 22, and she believed it, and it was very strange. So there you go. I wanted to make sure I could give a real world example. It is crushing my heart that I can't put that book, that I can't share that book with you all, right? But I can't do it because it's not right. And there are other books that also, you know, do this, that you know, like explain an ugly history to young children in an age appropriate way. So I don't have to add a book that's told one lie to the shelves, because there are others. But like an email was sent to Abrams and hopefully they'll fix it in the next print, you know, like maybe one day. So to just kind of push through here, information books that are superseded by a newer edition. Travel books are really a great example of that. You probably don't want like an Italy travel book published in like 1943. Some of the stuff probably isn't there anymore. Or outdated bestsellers. I mentioned Danielle Steele at one point. She was popping. Is she popping right now? Not in my world. And that sort of outdated bestsellers, that's also a space where it might change community to community. Maybe there are some folks that are still, communities that are still power reading through Harry Potter, and others like everyone's read it already and like now they're just watching the movies, right? So that's going to vary community by community, but it is criteria to take into consideration when looking at the contents of books. So then we also mentioned format. Are the pages torn or broken? Has it been edited by patrons with like whiteout or things? Like, as much as I want to fix my version of fix this George Washington Carver lie, like, just we don't want that. An example, if anyone here works with young littles, Karma Wilson, Bear Sees Colors, Bear Sees Shape, Bear Sees a lot of stuff. Those books are so well loved that at one point we had a copy of that book and every single page had been taped back in with like book fixing tape. I'll give you one page, I might even give you two, but certainly not all of them. At that point, that's when you want to tap into that the portion of your budget that you have set aside for replacements and replace your collection, because you want to have pride in it. And, you know, rips and coffee stains and watermarks, it's just not, we're not here for it. And then use, right? So the average book circulates the most within, or the approximately 50% of circulation of a title occurs in the first 5 years. So in the first couple of years that a title sits on your shelves, that's when the most circulation is going to happen. So you're sort of able to build a case for if an item hasn't circulated in the last 3 to 5 years, it's not likely, unless something wild happens, like we put Enola Holmes on Netflix, right? Like, it's the odds of that book certainly, you know, flying off of your shelves after it hasn't moved in the last 3, 4, or 5 years are pretty slim. So, you know, that's sort of a general rule that you can work with regards to weeding for use circulation. So we're going to talk quite a bit today about the CREW method, and CREW stands for Continuous Review, Evaluation, and Weeding. The Texas State Library and Archives Commission came up with this manual that we're going to be referencing. We're going to have the link to it in these slides, but the link is also available on the website. I put mine in a little binder here because, like I said, we do weed. This is something that we do like need to use. So it's available, you're going to get it. Don't worry about, like, you know, frantically scribbling this down.
And I threw the link in the chat just in case you want to pull it up and flip through while we're here.
Yep, because there's one page in particular that we're going to talk quite a bit about. So the CREW manual gives us a lot of information, but it really gives us this like one acronym to kind of like the one acronym to rule them all. And it's musty. What a weird word, right? But here we are. So the M stands for misleading or inaccurate. We've talked about that with Pluto, and, you know, God, I mean, I really want to put it on the shelves, guys. I really, really do. But instead, I'm just going to keep it with me. And, you know, one day, misleading, inaccurate, ugly, like we said. That Karma Wilson book, we all love Colors Bear, but like, we don't need every single page to be taped. It's time to buy a new one. If it's superseded by newer or better work, again, travel books, you don't want like Italy from 1942, you want Italy from like 2019, the before times. If it's trivial, no literary or scientific merit, you probably don't need, you know, how to use Windows 94 anymore. We can let it go. We've moved on, we've evolved. If it's irrelevant to the needs and interests of your community. So like we said, some of this stuff is going to be community by community based. Maybe everyone in your community is still reading Harry Potter. Maybe nobody is reading Harry Potter. It's going to vary place by place. And also, if the information can be found elsewhere, our second slide, we talked about the various resource sharing opportunities here. So maybe you don't need some of that stuff in your reference collection anymore because it is updated and well kept in digital databases that we have. Maybe you don't need 6 copies of something anymore that maybe you used for a book club once upon a time, because you can use the Deliver It system or ILL, things like that. So what we do know is, with regard to patrons, but also with some librarians, right? Like when we attach ourselves to something, again, I think this really happens in the youth sphere. Like, I can't believe you're throwing that out. Like, I can't believe you're getting rid of boxcar children. Everyone loves boxcar children. No, everyone loved boxcar children in 1995. We have moved on. So there's this really lovely quote here. And again, you're going to get the slide so you can kind of read through and it later, but it's sort of the end. I think that's the most striking. But more important than anything else, I'm finished with the idea that books can, by virtue of their existence, are precious things that can never outlive their usefulness. As much as it might crush some souls to hear me say this, they are just books. They are just books. It's not food. It's not water. It's not a roof. It's not socks. It's not shoes, right? Like it's not eyeballs. It's a book, right? Like it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. We'll all live through it. So one of the first things that came out of my mouth when I started this presentation is that we can't give you a formula. I'm gonna give you a formula. So it's a formula that, you know, you can kind of, you don't necessarily want to glue yourself to like a barnacle, right? And to see these, if you do have the crew manual, or if you did click on that link that Maria sent, page 105 lines out all of these formulas, which again are suggestions, right? Like you don't, it's not a live or die by situation. So the way these formulas are set up is they give you an age, they give you a circ, and then they give you that musty acronym. So for example, the 610 section, that's medicine, right? So if it's over 5 years old, if it hasn't circed in 3 years, and if it hits one of those musty acronyms, let it go. Particularly medicine, right? Things are changing. We're learning new things. Let it go. Get it out of there. The 004s, computers. If you go in there and you still have like the Fool's Guide to Windows XP, for the love, let it go. Please get rid of it. But sort of the general formula for that is 3. And then you'll see an X there and musty. So what that X means is that that particular category doesn't matter. So because we're only looking at something that has been published within the last 3 years, the circ number doesn't really matter because it hits that 3 to 5 year sphere that we talked about a little bit before. So if you go to your computer section, your 004s, you see something was published more than 3 years ago, get rid of it. Get rid of it, let it go. So again, on page 105, you're going to see guidelines for all areas of nonfiction. And this is really where all of the collections, right? So academic, school, academic in particular, quite honestly, school and public libraries, like that page really breaks down all the sections of Dewey. I know not everyone uses Dewey, and I know we have strong feelings about Dewey, but this is just like what we got, right? It's going to give you a different formula that looks like the one here on the screen for the various sections from the 00s to the 90s.
Can I weigh in? Because you mentioned academics, it made me think about academic libraries and thinking about like my alma mater, which prides itself on having hundreds of thousands of books and this huge collection. And I know for a fact that, 99% of those books don't circulate. And in academic libraries, there can be different philosophies. And this is again where we encourage you to know your collection and your community and your patrons and what your library and your university and college are trying to do. So if your college specializes in nursing, you want to ensure that your nursing collection is super up to date. Likewise, if you're cranking out teachers, make sure your education section is super up to date. So really focus on what makes your collection suitable and best for your community and your patrons. So everything that we say, make sure that it makes sense in the context of your library.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and another thing to consider, right? This is going to be 2 hours of your life, but I think it's really important not to focus on like just this page, right? Like, they gave us the formula, that's what I came here for, and ignore the rest of it, or sort of put less emphasis on the rest of it, such as knowing your community. You have to look at the full picture here. Don't miss the forest for the trees, because otherwise things get messy and confusing and do something that maybe you didn't intend to do. And then so just sort of the last bit, there are certain areas in the world that like change super, super quickly right now, like that's tech, like tech changes very quickly. We know infectious diseases changes really quickly, don't we? we're all over 2 years old. Things like green technology, climate change, blah, 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 all of that. And so for those sort of spheres and areas, and again, leaning into technology, if it's something, or academic, whatever your community specializes in, one of the, like, a formula to look at is 2x musty. If it's over 2 years old, it doesn't really matter how much it's searched. And if it hits one of those musty curriculums, get rid of it, replace it with something else. So this crew method is actually the new crew method, even though it's from 2012, there was an old crew method. So some of the slight changes that exist here, that page 105 with the chart of formulas, that's something new that's been added. There are fantastic resources in the bibliography. That's something that's been added. Explaining the criteria a little bit more, like just sort of going into a bit more detail about some of this stuff and giving us that really lovely chart and additional resources that we can go look at on our own to sort of expand our knowledge and not just sort of live with what's been put in 108 pages. Those are just some additions. And again, that's the link, but at this point, the link is all over the place. So there are a couple of special areas that have been added to the new 2012 crew method as well, including reference, non-print, and children's. We're going to hit those individually later, but there are sections to those because there can be some like finicky nuance going on in there. And what would we not weed, right? Like, what are we not just gonna throw in, the pile for however we choose to dispose of? Things of local interest. And again, we're just going to keep saying it. You have to know your community, which might be difficult, particularly if you don't live in the town that you work in, but like, figure it out. Go to the community events on the green, whatever it is, because there might be some things that are important to your area. In my time living in Connecticut, when we moved here, we moved to Groton. So that's sort of my Connecticut home, which is a submarine capital of the world. We feel very passionately about the Nautilus over there. There are gonna be some local and special interest things to the town of Groton, that sort of southeastern Navy base, all that stuff, that area down there that's really important to us that like Torrington doesn't really care about. So you have to sort of know that, and don't just throw that stuff out. Like if we found nuclear sub schematics, like don't you dare, right? Like that's really important to that community. Rare items, the Titanic necklace stone, if you find that in the basement, like don't throw it away. Materials that are out of print and might be irreplaceable. We're going to talk a little bit about some things that can be done with some of that stuff. And something of research value. Can you give it to a museum? Maybe like the Pequot Museum, if you find something that maybe there isn't really a specific need for in your community, but you can find that there's a nearby museum that might find some benefit for it. So there are a couple things that just ignore those things when we're talking about the whole weeding process and the why.
Cool. So now we get to talk about how you do all of this. So let's start with when. There's a lot of logistics, right? It's easier if you schedule it, right? And make it a priority. We all know that deadlines happen and bonfires happen, and you got to put out this fire and put out that fire. If you can schedule it and put it on your calendar and block your other meetings around it, that will help you get it done. Maybe you can do it first thing in the morning. If your library doesn't open till 10, you could spend maybe an hour from 9 to 10 in the stacks every Wednesday weeding. It's a great opportunity to get out there when the phones are quiet and there's no patrons around, and doing it for that short period of time is really helpful too. You will also want to have somebody shelf read before you go weeding, just to make sure that the items are in order on the shelf as expected, so that when you go out there and you're weeding, you're able to find what it is you're looking for. And you could also maybe do this in conjunction with an inventory, right? So print your shelf list and make sure, like, is this thing actually on the shelf where we think it is? Is it checked out right now? Is it not on the shelf? Do I actually know what's in my collection? And I can say full honesty here at the Middletown Library Service Center, we have a problem with this just because of the consolidation and all of the weeding we've done and the changeover in our ILS. So we have done some major shelf reading and inventory as well, just to try and clean up our database. Also, try it in small doses. As I mentioned, even an hour a week is fine, right? Because you're making progress on it. So people sometimes attend these webinars and they're like, oh my God, now that I know what it entails, I am never going to get this done. That's totally okay, right? It's an ongoing process. It's continuous, right? Remember, crew, that very first word is continuous. It's going to keep going on. So that's why just do it a little bit at a time. Spend some time in the stacks, spend some time at your computer, actually taking those things out of the catalog and marking them, and just poke away at it. It's okay. And if you can do it throughout the year, that's great. So that every week or every month, maybe you're making some progress on it. So it's not just a winter project, it's a year-round project. And obviously, before you do any kind of renovation or construction project, you want to do a really thorough weeding of your collection. Because as a construction manager, a construction grant administrator, I can tell you that the last thing you want to do is box up and move and store and pay for storage and move back and unbox and shelve items that you don't want to keep and that your community doesn't want to use. So make sure that you're weeding before you do any kind of renovation project. And then let's talk about who. So it's really helpful if everybody on your library staff is understanding what's happening and why it's important and the purpose of it. And now you have some language that you can bring to them about why you're doing it and why it's important. And it's a little bit easier sometimes to convince staff or not. You may have some hardliners in the library, but you'll also want to talk to your friends and your trustees and your stakeholders and get them worked around to it. And sometimes, again, the language that Kim was talking about, whether you call it weeding or deselection or collection maintenance, I also, when I worked at the Ritzy Library, we would call it refining the collection because they all exactly, they were all collectors of art, or something. And they understood, oh, we're refining the collection. Because to them, they understood you're making it better, right? You are improving the collection, the quality of the collection for your community. And I think I also made a joke back to the weeding thing. I made a joke to them about, how one gardener's weed is another gardener's wildflower. So I am weeding this thing from my garden, from my collection, potentially passing it on to somebody else in a book sale or whatever. And they think it's the most beautiful wildflower ever and are thrilled to have that particular book. So in a way, it's passing on our weeds to somebody who will appreciate them. So find some language that really resonates with your stakeholders and coworkers as you're explaining the process to them. Now, also, it is helpful if you work with a buddy. Kim and I will often bounce things off each other, or when we were reading professional development collection, I would talk to my colleagues about certain things. It's nice to have somebody to kind of reinforce your decisions and lighten the workload with you. Also, you're going to get to sections where you are not the expert, like those medical sections. So there are some experts out there who have said they will help you. So up at Yukon Health Center Library, HealthNet, they're willing to help with medical collections, and the state's law librarians will actually help you with your legal collections. So get in touch with them for some advice about what you might want to get rid of from your stacks. And we do like to say, really, ultimately, the person who is responsible for collection development and collection management will make the final decision about what goes. In theory, there's somebody at your library who has a really holistic view of the collection. So whether it's somebody who manages the youth services collection or somebody who manages specific areas, it's really helpful to have an authoritative person who can decide what to weed. And of course, you want to develop some guidelines for your support staff and volunteers when they're shelving, because they can help you find items to weed. So if they're shelving and they notice an adjacent title that is completely beaten up and loved to death, they can pull it off for you and throw it in a box. And you'll sweep by and take a look and say, okay, is this something that I want to weed from the collection? And do I want to use some of my collection budget to find a replacement copy or find an updated version with the same information? So you can get everybody else on staff to help you with this as well. So disperse the workload. Supplies, get your little cart together, right? Grab yourself a book truck, pile it all on there. Grab some circulation records. And depending on what ILS you use, hopefully there's some kind of report already built in there where you can pull out information about circulation. You'll want to get the date that something last circulated. It's helpful to have the number of circulations. And in our case, you know, we switched ILS systems every 4 or 5 years, so we can at least get information back to the last switch. But when I was weeding, I found it really helpful, not just the last circ date, but the number of circs to help me understand really how much interest there was in a specific title. So you'll also bring your crew manual. You can print out parts of it, or you can bring it on your laptop, whatever's convenient for you. Like that, like Kim has. You can bring some scrap cards with you. It helps to have note paper. You need something to write with, and you'll need to bring some weeding slips, which we have not talked about yet, but we have an example of, and we have a PDF of on our LibGuide. So there's some little slips you can bring with you to help figure out why you're weeding this particular item. And you can bring your laptop with you. That was really fun. When I was weeding in the stacks, I had my computer with me and I could really dial in and see, okay, what's going on here? Let me look at my spreadsheet. Let me mark up my spreadsheet as I'm weeding. So bring that with you. And there's a weeding slip. So this is something that my previous colleague, Linda Williams, developed just as a really succinct way to help you take notes on why you're getting rid of this item, right? So you take the book off the shelf, you've got your little slip, you'll mark on there, I want to withdraw this, or I want to repair, replace, or something else. And you'll check off your reasons why, and you can leave yourself a little note. And there's a handy little table right at the bottom there with a reminder of some of the crew formulas for you, or when you might want to weed something. So we do have sample slips available for you. All right, and then how are you going to do this? Really, it helps to take each item off the shelf, right? Like you're walking down there with your cart full of stuff, pull each thing off the shelf, flip through it. That's the best way you can determine condition and whether every page is actually taped up, what the binding's like. So take it off, flip through. Also look at those dates of publication, all of those last circs, format, all of those condition items that we discussed, all of the criteria when you might want to weed something. Think about, again, about content, what might have changed, how accurate is it? Is this something in the standard catalogs that I may want to have as a really standard resource? And now that we have all of these fabulous consortia, are there other copies available to me so that I don't need to keep my copy that hasn't circulated in 10 years sitting on my shelf because I can borrow somebody else's? So keep all of those factors in mind. And then next, what? So for each item you're removing, put your little weeding slip in there, marked it up. You're gonna bring your book truck back of books that you're weeding back to your desk, and at some point you're gonna remove them all from the catalog. Please, 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 my pet peeve is make sure you're somehow marking them as being withdrawn or discarded, whether that's a line through your barcode or a stamp, some way of indicating that that book is no longer yours. And then dispose of it according to your policy. And we're going to talk about all the means of disposal. But my point about stamping it with withdrawn or discard is if you're disposing it and sort of keeping it in the stream, those books may come back to you in the future if you have not specifically noted on there that you have withdrawn or discarded it, right? Somebody's going to find it in California and mail it back to you because they think it's your book. Yeah. Oh, this is Kim's slide. Kim has actually done the last chance display.
Yes, the last chance display, the Island of Misfit Books. So what this is, stolen from Pinterest. I did not create this. Just want to drop that disclaimer in because this is recorded and then put on the internet. So let's say you're going through the collection and you've had a or that collection, right? Where it's just like full and it's swamped, and maybe even some of the newer things or things that you just know would be popular are in there, but they haven't searched because no one can find them. So if you just know in your heart of hearts that someone wants this book, they just don't know that they want it because they haven't been able to find it, you can set up the Island of Misfit Books. So you can set it up on a book cart. If you've got a like a table or like a space, wherever you want. I have found it to be really helpful if it's somewhere near the circulation desk, just personally. You put up a little sign, you make a bulletin board or whatever, and you put a couple of books on them. You don't want it to be like hundreds, right? You want it to be like maybe 15, 20, 30 titles, which makes sense because like Maria said, we're doing this a bit at a time. We're not reading like the entire children's section or the entire biography section at one time. You will go wackadoo. So you put them on the Island of Misfit Books, and then you set a time, right? So you say in 3 weeks, whatever is still here is gonna go. People just didn't want it the way that I thought they would. I thought someone would want to read Bridgerton, but like nobody in my town cares. So that's what happens. But if people are taking the books, they're taking it to you, they're checking it out. Then when it returns, it automatically goes onto the cart, into the shelves, the way that anything else would. So it's whatever's left on your cart, on your display, Island of Misfit Books, one last chance display. You give it like one more shot to see if maybe someone will take it now that they can find it.
This is also a great compromise option for those books that we love personally, but we can tell from the circulation numbers nobody else does, right? Like I bought this book, I love this book. Okay, let me see if anybody else loves it, like Kim said. So if you have coworkers who really don't want to get rid of a book, say, you know what? Let's put it on the last chance display, right? Based on our other criteria, we would read this book, but I know you love it. Let's do last chance display and see if anybody else loves that. So it's a good little kind of, we like get it out the door opportunity, compromise. So
you obviously wouldn't do this with the taped up Karma Wilson, right? Like this is for the books that are still in fairly good condition. It's really circ numbers that are driving this. That's what this kind of thing is for.
Yep. Oh, and here we're getting back to those rare books. Like Kim mentioned, what would you not read? You might not want to just chuck a rare book. So if you come across something in your stacks that looks really special to you and looks like it may be rare, like the time we were doing this in person at a library, and I happened to pull a book off the shelf that was a first edition of a Eugene O'Neill play that was signed by Eugene O'Neill. I see a message that my internet connection is unstable, so I apologize if I freeze up. But in that sense, okay, Eugene O'Neill, signed by him, that's potentially a rare book that's worth some money. You may want to sell that. You may want to pass it on, as Kim suggested, to a research collection nearby. But here are some sources where you can look it up, some prices, and learn about things from the rare books and manuscript section. You can check out some online booksellers and see what some current prices are for that item. But just to remind you that just because something is old does not mean it's valuable. And I feel like this is something librarians get that not everybody does, right? There are warehouses full of old books that nobody will give you a penny for. So just remember, just because it's old does not mean it's worth anything, but you can check on those values. Kim's busy talking about the cat. So let's talk about disposal. There are so many options, right? You can sell it, you can give it away, you can recycle it, you can destroy it. So let's talk about the most palatable one I feel like for us is selling or giving away. If you're lucky enough to have a friends of the library, or you do your own library book sale, try it there. You may also be able to sell online. You could potentially list it on eBay or elsewhere. And my library at home will actually work with a consigner. He is a bookseller and he'll list them online for us. And he takes a percentage and gives us the rest, which is a fabulous deal. Another option is to just give them away, right? Like give them away for free. Maybe there's an assisted living community in your area, a senior center where they would love some of your large print or some of your old Danielle Steele and mysteries and fiction. If there's a prison in your area, check with them and find out what their criteria are. Often they will accept soft cover or specific subjects, but that is an option and a potential opportunity to give things away to people who will greatly appreciate them. You may also be able to find some international source that will take them for you, or just put a book truck out in your library and put a big sign on it that says free and stick it out front. And that was a really cool thing that many libraries were doing during COVID while they were shut down. So maybe people couldn't come in and pick up things, but there was a cart of free books right outside the door, almost 24/7, right? So who cares if somebody steals them, right? They were free, just put them out there. Also, you could think about recycling it. So actually pulping the paper and turning it into a recyclable item, or maybe do a book art program. And we have some links on our LibGuide for book art programs. Fabulous way to reuse those books. And sometimes you may just get to the point where the book is filthy and nasty and you need to throw it away, right? So just destroy it. Do it in a way that, it doesn't scream library book. If you need to put it in a black bag and put it in the dumpster, do that. But there are many cases when a book just needs to go in the garbage. So be aware of that, right? If you don't want to touch it, nobody else wants to touch it. That's an option. And some really specific options for disposal. Again, you don't need to write all these down. We have the links for them, but just letting you know that there are some really great resources out there. More giveaways, recycling, green weeding is a really cool thing. There are those links for book art. So the options are there.
And I just wanted to jump in really quick, and Christine mentioned the Baker and Taylor Sustainable Shelves Program, which we at the Service Center have actually just started to use within the last couple of weeks. And you'll see that there's a link for that here as well. So the way that works is Baker and Taylor will actually take any book, whether you bought it from Baker and Taylor or not. You create a list of the titles and the ISBN numbers. They will send you that list back and they will tell you if it's pink or if it's green. If it's pink, then that means they're going to pulp it and they're going to do sort of the green recycling, which is why it's called Sustainable Shelves. If it's pink, then you will actually get paid for it. And the money for that will go directly into your Baker and Taylor TS360 account. And you can decide if you want it to go into your book account or if you want it to go into like your online books if you buy that. So that's something that we are actively using here. It is worth it because they'll take everything, unlike Better World Books, which will only take some titles, and then you have to figure out how to dispose of the rest of them. They don't do books on CDs or anything like that. We need to check. Yeah, I saw Christine mention that. So yeah, Baker and Taylor send shipping boxes, Sustainable Shelves, whatever box you have. So if you constantly sort of get boxes in from orders, they'll take everything and you just click a button and schedule a UPS pickup. I think we have a UPS pickup scheduled for today for that. So the link is there. The lady who handles Connecticut is super nice and has like a lovely country twang. So there are options. And again, these are hyperlinked and you can go through them later.
And adding to what Kim said about what they will take. All of these links for the giveaway options have their own criteria for what they will accept and will not accept. So just get in touch with them, right? And find out what will you take, what will you not take. And a little caveat, if a book is no longer accurate, don't pass it on to somebody else as a fabulous thing, right? Like don't send it to Kenya and say, oh, but they just need books. No, they still need accurate books, right? They still need correct books. Don't be misinforming everybody around the world if you can avoid it. Find another way to dispose of that book instead.
Absolutely. Pulp it. Save the world a little. Okay, so we're going to hit some of those special collections that we mentioned that we've said the crew manual, the new crew manual has expanded upon. So we are going to start with children's fiction. And there were some folks who mentioned fiction and series and things like that. So we will be getting to some of this here. So some of the things to think of when you're considering your children's fiction collection is it still popular? I don't think Twilight is as popular as it once was. Like, I think that ship has sailed a little bit. Divergent, that ship has sailed, right? Like, is it something that people want a lot of right now? Boxcar Children, we had to let them go. Broke my heart. Babysitter's Club, the chapter books, we had to let them go, but they're being replaced with the graphic novels, especially now that there's like a Netflix show. So those are some of the things that you have to think of, and that's where that heart hurt and that nostalgia can set in for some of us when we have to delete, Animorphs, which we loved in the 4th grade, but the 4th graders of today can't pronounce it and don't care. You have to take those things into consideration. Something that we talk about in like our diversity audit presentations, and some of those presentations that really lean into DEI, is stereotyping. Does the book negatively reflect on people with disabilities, people with different skin tones, people with different religious backgrounds? If it is, you're really going to want to consider getting rid of that. And again, I just sort of want to slide back a little bit to when we were talking about Pluto, and like, don't we want to keep the books from when Pluto was a planet so that the children know that Pluto used to be a planet? There are other ways to do that. We can get books that have been more modernly published that explain kind of the history. It's sort of the same with Your Legacy, except for the George Washington Carver part, right? We don't necessarily need books that negatively portray people by stereotyping them, because there are so many books that explain what used to happen in a more palatable and less upsetting way for our marginalized kids. So that's something to consider when reading as well. Classics and award winners seems to be the hardest section to deal with for those of us in youth services. One of the things to think about, is it still in demand? Do we really need every single nutmeg ever? Do we really need every single Newbery ever? Newbery hit 100 years this year. Good God, do we need the one that was published in 1921? I don't know, maybe you do, but like, you probably don't, but maybe you do, right? These are things to sort of think of and sit with. Maybe some of those old, like, we weeded some of them from our professional collection, the like best children's books, but when you look at it, it was published in like 1983, so it's really the best children's books from 1983 and in the past. Like, you don't need that anymore. Like, it's just time to let those things go. And again, what we said was, you don't pick one slide and hone in and focus on that one slide today. Do not miss the forest for the trees. You have to take all of this and make your decisions looking at this as a whole. Don't get caught up on classics. Make your own decisions about Dr. Seuss. I am not going to weigh in. Keep him or don't keep him. It's completely up to you. Some people are upset with Arthur now. Keep him or don't keep him. Follow your weeding policy. Follow your collection management policy. Know what your community wants and needs and is still collecting from you, and make your own decisions. I know the classics are hard. I really, truly do. Maria shared the inclusive, or the diversity page. A drop down from that is an inclusive collections page. There's a library in Massachusetts that went through this entire process and leaned very hard into Dr. Seuss and his racial images. And in that, I think it's a 1-hour workshop, they take you through their thought process, the committee they created, consulting the community, and then let you know what they ultimately decided. That is not to say to do exactly what they did, but it's just to give you some information. You have to take the whole thing in. But if no one's checked out that particular book in 17 years, just get rid of it. No one wants it. And also with regards to children's books, the picture books and early chapters in particular, the early readers, the bindings on these things are not always the best. If pages are slipping out of your Rainbow Magic Fairies or, other titles like that, let them go. And again, because I mean, when I was still in frontline, those were so popular. But so like if they're still very well read, then that's when you dip into the funding that you've set aside for replacement and you replace them. But get rid of them, because again, you want to make sure you have pride in your collection. And like, if someone picks up the book and 3 pages fall out, I'm super embarrassed. And if that ever happens with a service center book, I'm really sorry. Send me an email. We'll replace it. So young adult fiction. A lot of the rules are fairly the same. The YA turnover is like lightning. It is crazy fast. All you have to do is spend 6 minutes on Twitter and like you see it. So if a YA title is over 5 years old, unless it's something super, super prolific, consider it for the selection. There are some titles that have super old-fashioned covers, and publishers are doing a really good job of reprinting those. So I mentioned Enola Holmes, for example. That's actually a really old book. It's not a new book at all, but with the release of it as a movie with The Girl from Stranger Things on Netflix, there might be a renewed interest on it. It's also on the Governor's Summer Reading List. There might be a renewed interest in it. Swap out your old copy for one with a newer and more palatable title for the Gen Zers of today, because they might not want like a really old one. They did that with Hardy Boys. They did that with Nancy Drew. They did it with Hardy Boys like twice. So those are the things you have to pay attention to, because kids and me, we will judge books by their covers. We will judge them hard and we won't feel bad about it. So the fad books, is the fad over? Like I mentioned, I was a big fan of Divergent. I don't know what happened. Like everyone was talking about it and then no one was talking about it. It happened really quickly. I'm still a little upset. But that's the way it goes, because there's so many books that are flooding the market. It doesn't take a lot of time before, just no one to care anymore. And that's sometimes where you have to let go of your nostalgia and you have to let it go, especially if your circ numbers are backing up the assumptions that you're making about whether the fad is still here or is not. Series. So series can be difficult. Maria's going to talk a little bit about this when we hit our manga section, but there are some series that are long and like frustrating. And if you have lost books in the middle of the series, if you can't replace them, it might be worth it to get rid of it. But the caveat that I can give you is, if you think there is still a demand, right? Or if there is still a demand, maybe keep the first 2 or 3 and use the resource sharing systems that we have to keep up with the rest of the series. So if you have Bridgerton 1 and 2, but you're like, everyone can find Bridgerton right now, it's a really bad example, but let's pretend it's not a Netflix show. If you had Bridgerton 1 or 2, but you're missing like 4 and 5 and 6, maybe just keep the first and second. If you've got a patron who's expressed that they're interested in reading the entire book, when they take the second book home, go on ahead into Deliver It and go ahead and request the third book so that it's there for them. You don't want to keep incomplete series, because again, it's just taking up space. It's not a collection that you can have pride in. Tap into these resources. Connecticut is a small state. Like you can get, like I've met people on street corners to like give them books before. Like it's really not that hard here in particular. It's not like it's California or anything. Tap into those resources. You don't have to keep a whole series, right? You can just keep books 1 or 2 just in case, kids might express an interest, and then tap into those other resources to get the rest. Picture books. What we find with some picture books is that sometimes like no one really cares what the book is. They just care that it's about trucks because their kid's really into trucks right now. So if there's a truck on it, they want it. The thing that can happen with that is that picture books in particular, tend to go out in large quantities. It's very rare that someone comes in for just like one book. They're going to come in for 5, 6, or 10, especially if you're a public library that's servicing local daycares, local community houses, and things like that. They'll come in with a wagon sometimes and fill it up. So they fall apart very, very quickly. You're really going to want to keep on top of replacing the Karma Wilson books of the world. Like what is your copy of Rainbow Fish look like right now? It's really important to keep an eye on those. Perhaps you have like a box or a bin or something behind the circulation desk. And when items come back, if it's falling apart, if it's been taped a lot, if like someone dropped their applesauce on it while, reading page 6, you just tuck it into a box and let the department head or the person who purchases the titles, they can go through and replace that. We do that here. Grace will send me an email with titles and ISBNs, like these have to be replaced. And sort of going back to series, here we have discussion sets more than anything else. And she'll be like, once there were 12, now there's 8, you know, and we'll just sort of go in and either buy more or make adjustments if need be. So picture books fall apart very quickly. So it's really important to keep track of those. Again, fads exist within picture books the same way they do within YA or middle grade. Do people still read Caillou? I don't know. Do you need all the Cailloux in the world? Like, maybe not. Are people still reading Little Bill? Really, probably not. Like, do you need all of those? And again, this goes hand in hand with circ numbers and all of that. But some of those fads that were really, really hot, Peppa Pig, bane of my existence, couldn't tell you why. If no one cares about Peppa Pig anymore, if they've now moved on to whoever, then, you know, maybe you don't need as many Peppa Pigs. Maybe you only keep 2 or 3. And, you know, if there's that one child or those 2 children that are really into Peppa Pig, please make use of these other resources that we've set up for you. Or like, who's it, Angela Anaconda? Just kind of weird, right? Like, I need them all. So, nonfiction. The rules for children in YA nonfiction are going to follow fairly closely to the rules for adult nonfiction that we've been talking about. Pluto, get it out of here. Peanut butter, get it out of here. And really, especially, we've already mentioned it, these kids are going to believe what they take out of the library because it's in the library. And we, as adults, are telling them that the library is where you go to find factual information about thing, insert thing here. So if they take out a book and they're in the 3rd grade and they're like, oh my gosh, George Washington Carver, a black guy, invented peanut butter? How exciting. I'm going to go buy some peanut butter. Well, I'm sorry, little Timmy, that's a lie. He didn't. He might have invented like peanut oil or something, but he didn't invent peanut butter. We've lied to you. Don't do it. Don't lie to little Timmy. He'll mess up his solar system diorama if he doesn't have Pluto as a dwarf planet, and he'll get an F, and it'll be all our fault. And we're going to move on to grown-up fiction, which I know nothing about.
That's all right. I will pinch in and try to work our way through fiction, which is a complicated subject. And the first bullet point there is the one that is going to be most important for pretty much every collection and every community, regardless of where your library is it circulating? So look at those circ numbers. When was it published? When was the last date of circulation? How often did it circulate? If it's no longer circulating, probably time to let it go, right? Yep. And then you can, I don't know if this is the time to talk about it or later. I can't remember if we have another slide for it, but inevitably somebody's going to come in and ask for the book that you just weeded. That is going to happen. Prepare yourself for that. Anticipate that. The book that has not been checked out in 17 years, somebody's going to request. But that's the beauty of Connecticut, right? You can go on to find it and figure out which library has another copy. You can request it. You can have it delivered right to your library through the delivery system. Or you can say to that patron, the library in the next town has a copy. Why don't I call them over and see if they will pull it off the shelf and hold it for you? So you have options, right? You have an entire state's worth of books at your disposal. So keep that in mind. So is a book circulating? And if it's not, maybe it's time to let it go. Obviously, duplicates. You had to buy a whole bunch of those James Pattersons right when they came out. But after everybody read them, maybe you can weed back to just one. And then maybe in the future, you can start weeding all of the James Pattersons and really start looking at circ and usage. If there's been 0 circ in the last 3 years, I think that's what the crew manual recommends, is that you consider weeding. Likewise, if it was published more than 10 years ago and it's not a classic or a perennially popular author, that's something you can consider weeding. So keep those in mind. Looking at series, if the author is still writing that series, obviously you want to keep it, maybe even if the circulation is a little low on it. But if the series is completed or the author didn't complete it and there has been no circulation on that, consider weeding it, right? Too. And like Kim said, Maybe you can keep the first ones and borrow the others. Maybe, as with any series, whether it's fiction or whether it's manga, maybe you think about giving it to another library to fill in some of their gaps. So think about if it's part of an incomplete series, you might want to weed it or find copies elsewhere. If the author is kind of outdated and not writing anymore and kind of a little passé, that may be a reason, particularly based on your circulation numbers, to think about weeding something. If it's an author who only ever wrote one book, or they're kind of an obscure foreign author, and the book is more than 10 years old, those are great times to weed as well. Now, if it's a dead classic author, Hemingway, like how many copies of every Hemingway book do you really need? Can you get rid of some of the earlier or lesser works and keep some of the real classics as long as they're circulating, and supplement with perhaps public domain books if those are available, or other copies from other libraries? So again, think about really what's being used, how your community is using it, whether it's important for them. Similarly, minor short story collections, those can go. Look at the updated style and setting and genres. Like there are some outdated genres like nurse stories that were like big in the 50s and 60s. Nursing stories are no longer popular. Those can go. Those kind of outdated things. If it's in bad condition, maybe it has been loved to death. Maybe it just needs, as we've been talking about, a little replacement with a new cover. That poor condition can mean people really enjoyed it. And genres are interesting. So when we talk about fiction, this slide really applies to everything that's nonfiction, right? So we always get comments, you didn't tell me what to do with romances, and you didn't tell me what to do with Westerns. So fiction applies to everything regardless of genre. And really think about, are people still asking for that genre, right? Nursing stories, Westerns, old science fiction. And if you're not familiar with that genre, find somebody who is, right? So grab that patron who loves science fiction, or your coworker who loves mysteries and urban fiction, and get their feedback on things, right? So if you're maybe on the fence about, do we want to keep it? Do we want to weed it? Pull in some other experts, just as we would with a health collection or a legal collection. Find those people who can help you out. And obviously, are there other copies available to you in the consortium or in the state? So take a look, right? And as Francie said, obviously don't assume that somebody has it, right? Because we're librarians, right? We don't assume, and we all know what assume means, right? So do your due diligence, check the catalogs, find it, but also don't hang on to something just because nobody else in the state has it, right? If you're looking at your stats and you say, you know what, this is an older title, nobody's checked it out in 7 years or however many years, people in my community are no longer interested in this book. That's okay to let it go, right? Because if somebody does find an interest in that book, there are copies in the world that you can borrow. Even if it's not in our state, it may be in another library, or maybe you find it that it's cheaper and more effective to get a cheap used copy from somewhere and put it in your catalog and lend it to them. There are plenty of books in the world, and we can usually find a copy for somebody. So keep in mind, as I said, your library is not the Library of Congress, right? You do not have to have every book ever published, nor is your library Amazon, in the sense that you have to have a warehouse full of books available to people at all times. So manage your collection as best you can for your community and what their interests are. And then I think we talk a little bit more about these weeding tips. Rebecca Vanook wrote this fabulous column, which she then turned into a book, which we have here at the Service Center that you can check out, all about tackling fiction. And I stole a lot of those tips from her and from her book. But again, she reiterates that your considerations for weeding fiction are relevancy. Is it still being read, and does it reflect your community's needs and interests? So relevancy is her first criteria. Then currency, about whether that piece of fiction is up to date. Appeal of the actual book itself, if the condition and whether it looks good. Circulation is a major criteria for her, and just making your collection more accessible after you weed through your fiction. So take a look at her works. It's really helpful. Just getting your brain around that whole concept of fiction and all of the genres that go underneath. So then let's talk about graphic novels and manga. As Kim mentioned, these can be a little problematic because sometimes the series are really long, dozens and dozens of titles within a series. Sometimes the publishers just stop publishing, right? Like there's supposed to be more titles coming, but it just stops, right? So it's an incomplete series. It will never be completed. It's uncompletable. And they're also sometimes not the best physical materials. They tend to be a little fragile, that you tend to lose pages. So as you're weeding through your graphic novels collection, the criteria here for weeding are going to be similar to what they are for fiction. Look at condition, look at the duplicates. Maybe you can weed. If it's low circulation, that may be something you can weed. We talked about series and how to fill in gaps for yourself or for other libraries, but keep all of those criteria in mind for your graphic novels. And then reference. This has changed a lot. Boy, I remember when I started working at an academic library in 2006. Obviously, as an academic library, it had an enormous reference collection, right? That's what libraries did back then, particularly schools and academics, and a lot of publics had extensive physical print reference collections. But publishing has changed so much and electronic resources have changed so much that we are turning now toward those resources instead, because they can be updated so quickly and so easily. And often the electronic resources are much more current than we would actually have in print in our physical collections. So as you're weeding those reference collections, if you still have them, take a look, see if that information is available on Research at CT or in your own databases. If you're getting newer editions of something, get rid of the old ones. Also see what your patrons are using. And this is tricky, right? Because you're not getting circ stats on your reference collection. It stays in the building. So if you can get any in-house counts, ask your patrons to put those reference books on a cart and not reshelve them, so you can get those in-house counts, see what they're using, see what they're lingering around. Your observations will be helpful here. And then check the crew manual, right? So go back, take a look at the formula, find their guidance on those specific materials, whether it's an encyclopedia or an almanac or some other reference type item. Take a look at the formulas, and kind of in a not just a last chance display, but you might think about transferring some reference items to your circulating collection. So maybe they don't have to stay in the library anymore. Maybe they actually could get checked out to go home. Like, wouldn't that be awesome if I could take that birding book home with me and stare out the window and identify the bird that I'm looking at? Then you actually could get some real circ stats. So if something is on the shelf for years and years and doesn't circulate there, now you've got a good reason to weed that. Or you could highlight that in a display and just say, hey, these are now available to take home. So that kind of highlighting and just marketing in the material to remind people that they can check it out and bring it with them. Did I miss something in the chat? We own a core collection.
So I can answer that. Delete it now.
So the question is, we own a book in the core collection.
We deleted some of our core collection books, as a matter of fact. We own a core collection book. I check, and sometimes they're titles that the Summers Library has on their shelves, and it's in the core collection, but it's not circulating. Here's my issue with lists. If anyone's been in my diversity audit presentation, you have heard.
And we have the core collection here, if you're interested.
Yeah. But oh, okay, Kate, there you go, Maria. Hold up. It's like it's a book of books.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
And so this is young adult fiction, and I've also got middle and junior high core and senior high core collection. There's fiction core, there's nonfiction core. Meh.
It is a book of books. I am not a fan personally. This is just me. Don't listen to anything I'm saying, but I'm not a fan. And the reason I'm not a fan of blanket lists is because a list for who? A list for who? There's this core collection, because it's called core collection, then, we're assuming that everyone wants to read these books, or enough people want to read these books. Your community has spoken. Your community has spoken by not taking them, right? And again, I think we have to make sure that we are keeping inclusivity at the forefront of our minds while we're doing everything. We're not sitting here specifically, saying the word diversity 18 times or DEI 18 times, but take a look at your community, keeping in mind that there are some aspects of your community that you can't see. There are invisible marginalizations that can exist with people. And just because Jim Brooks decided that it belonged in this core collection book doesn't necessarily mean that the people in your community, that it's core for them, that it matters to them. I'm not a huge fan. Maybe nonfiction, like maybe I'll give you that, but fiction in particular, I do not believe in blind list ordering. It's soapbox. I'm gonna get off. Go watch my diversity audit video. Just watch the beginning, and you'll hear me go on and on about it. Delete it. Okay, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. All right. Oh, if we could swing back to other formats just very briefly.
Yes.
Just so you get a chance to see this slide again as you're weeding through your AV collections. This is, so if you've got physical movies, DVDs, if you've got physical CDs, remind yourself, is this format still popular with your patrons in your community? I think one time we talked about, oh my God, read your VHS. And somebody was like, hey, wait a minute, VHS is still popular in my community. I was like, okay, let me back off on that. Know your community, right? So is that format still popular with your community? Or can you update that item to get a more recent format that people will use? And condition is so important with AV. So maybe it's something you need to replace or find in a new format. Look at your circulation on that one. You might actually need to watch it to decide whether you want to keep it. That may happen if you don't have the equipment to watch it. That in itself may be a helpful reason why you would want to weed it. ILL can be a factor here, but remember, is it popular? Is it being used? And what's the condition look like? There is some help in the crew manual on specific formats. So take a look there.
I think that it's funny that you mentioned VHSs, because we're actually beginning to hit another milestone in just sort of modern day life with books on CD. I don't know about any of y'all if you've gotten a car before cars became more expensive than houses, but a lot of them don't have CD players in them anymore. I did not realize that my car didn't have a CD player for about a year. My computer doesn't have a CD player. The computers that we've been assigned for work, these laptops don't have CD ports in them anymore. So we're beginning to reach a point where we're about to hit another other format milestone as more and more items are being created that don't have the ability to play these things. Now, does that mean that you get rid of your books on CD? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Portable ones can be purchased, yada, yada. But from the perspective of someone who works with youth, maybe you might want to start looking into playaways. Maybe you want to start investing in your digital book collection, because unlike adults, kids don't have cars. They don't have cars. So even if you have a car that still has a CD player in it, not if you're 14, you don't. But it's just something to keep in mind. We're about to hit another milestone with another type of other format book, and keep an eye on the changes that are happening in your community, because they might be happening and you might be missing them. So now we're kind of we're petering off to sort of the end of our thing here. We're not going to dive deep into these, but we just want to show you that we have given you even more resources than kind of what we've presented today. Multiple pages of resources, as a matter of fact, things to look in on weeding and deselecting with regards to OCLC, some blogs and some websites, library journal articles that you might find interesting and important and helpful for you as you carry on with this weeding journey, but also as you if you have to work to build a case to your powers that be. So, you know, maybe you're here because you believe in the power of weeding, but you're trying to figure out how to explain that to the person in your facility who makes the decisions. We hope that some of the language that we've given you here in this presentation will be helpful. But if you think you just might need a little extra nudge, these other websites and resources might prove to be helpful for you. And again, here's some more. These are specific to the school system. A really cute infographic with yet another acronym. This one is not musty. This one is fresh. Foster, reflect, equitable, support, and high quality. The things that you want to keep in mind when you're managing and crafting your collection, again, particularly for those young kids who are literally still going through very important brain development steps where synapses are either connecting or dying. And once a synapse in a youth's brain has died and has not connected, it's almost impossible to kind of go back and address that. So for folks who, and for the record, like that actually happens up until 26. So I understand that academic libraries, like some of the situations might be different there, but brain development is still happening with young adults, and not young adults 14-year-olds, young adults 24-year-olds. There are still very important developmental steps that they're going through, very important synapses that are either connecting or dying off in their brain development. And so again, sometimes you might not want to get rid of something. Maybe it's time to look at your weeding policy and your collection management policy and make some modern changes and additions to it, because we have more information now than maybe we did when it was created. Some online courses that exist from LibraryU through WebJunction. You can create a WebJunction account for free. Maria, go ahead and run with this.
I forgot to mention on this slide, Connecticut libraries have access to Niche Academy through our website, and there are some resources on Niche Academy about weeding and collection management and resources there too. So remember to take a look at that.
Yes, we can drop the link because you want to go through the Connecticut State Library link. If you just go to nicheacademy.com, it'll prompt you to pay them for it. So we'll make sure that we get that for you. And it's also on our LibGuides page. And again, further reading, we have these books because that's what we do. This is just here. And I believe these are even hyperlinked to our catalog. I'm a big sucker for an infographic. So an infographic that explains the life cycle of a book, which again is why we're focusing on the term collection management and not just like acquisitions or something, because as you'll see here, acquisitions is just the first step of an overall cycle that just like goes and goes forever. So now we are actually going to take a look at a really short video. So Maria explained that once upon a time in the before times, this was a 3-hour course, because what we used to do is we would send you off into the stacks. Can you see it, Maria? The screen,
Coming.
okay?
It's coming.
Okay. Okay.
It's not playing yet. I see a little.
No, it's not playing. It's
okay.
No, it's not playing. So once upon a time, what we would do is if we were here at the service center, we would send you off into the stacks, or if we were at another library, we would designate a section for folks to go into, and we would have you model weeding, and we would have you use the weeding slip that we showed you a PDF on, so that not only were we here kind of talking at you, but then we sent you off into the world, aka nonfiction maybe, to put some of this weeding into practice, and then come back and explain why you chose to weed the things that you weeded. We're still not quite back to being in, full capacity, but we find that there's a big benefit of offering things online, because more people can participate. People at smaller libraries with smaller staffs are able to kind of have a headphone in and watch the presentation, and they're able to gain this knowledge when they couldn't before, if they had to drive to Middletown. So what we have here is a video that sort of models that. So I'm gonna now stop talking so that you can listen to me talk, because it's a video of me.
And if I can interject, if it doesn't distract you from Kim's video, be sure you type your last minute questions in the chat. So we'll have a few minutes at the end to hit those. Thank you.
Hold on. It stopped for reasons unknown.
Yep,
Let me
got
refresh.
a big X.
Oh, and it said network issue too. So let's. Hi everyone, this is Kim, your children and young adult library consultant, and I'm here to record a short video on examples of books that you might want to read from your collection and how to use the reading slips. So I'm going to turn my camera around here. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you are the weeding slips. This is the back, and this is the front. So you'll see on this weeding slip the acronym that we probably talked about in the webinar already, MUSTY. So this gives you kind of the outline of what you're looking for in a book that would require you to read it, or that would put it up for reading consideration. So we've got M for misleading, U for ugly, S superseded, T trivial, I irrelevant, and E elsewhere. So the first book that I would like to show you is this one, Inventions. So we can already look at the cover of this book and see that it's possible that it's a book that's a little older. The cover probably isn't going to be as interesting to the kids or teens that may come into our library looking for it. Let's open this book and check the publication date. So we'll see that this book was published in 2003, so well over 10 years ago. So let us come over here and take a look at our reading slip. So at first glance, I would categorize this as M, misleading, outdated or obsolete, and possibly also S, superseded. I am almost positive that there is a newer edition of, if not this exact book, Inventions, than a book that is fairly similar to it. So we would cross off M, outdated or obsolete, and possibly even S, superseded, if you have an additional copy of this book or something that's really comparable. And then we're going to take it to the back and we decide, is this a book that we want to repair, or is this a book that we want to replace? So there's nothing really structurally wrong with it. The spine is okay. None of the pages are ripped or watermarked. So this is just something that we would just want to go ahead and replace. So then you decide here with something else on this subject, with the newer edition of the same book. So maybe with something else on this subject, and then you could write some notes in here if you wanted to. One of the things that makes this particular reading slip incredibly helpful is that there's this little key on the back here with publication dates, so that you can kind of compare what the call number of the book is if it's nonfiction, and then you can kind of decide, is it 3 years old, is it 10 years old, and so on and so forth. And we've already decided this book is over 10 years old. It's time. So what you would do if you were reading a giant section is you would pop this flip here in the book, and then you would pop it on a book cart. So that way, when you finally do get around to pulling these books from the system, you'll remember why it was you chose to read this particular book. So let's take a look at another one. So here we have 2 copies of the same Cultures of the World book on Ghana. So let's go ahead and open this to see when this book was published. And this book was published in 1999. That is quite some time ago. So we also happen to have a newer edition of Ghana, the same Cultures of the World series. And let's see when this book was published. This book was published in 2019. significantly better than 1999. You don't have to read both of these books to know that there is probably newer and more accurate information in the 2019 Cultures of the World's Ghana book than in the 1999 one. So let's go right on back to our reading slips here. And this is absolutely superseded by a newer edition. And if you even wanted to jot a little note down saying that this book was published in 1999, then you could do that. Now on the back here, if you wanted to use the note section, then you could put something along the lines of own new edition 2019. Again, we fill out these slips and we add these notes because odds are you can read the books, say, you know, one day you isolate some time to go ahead and do that, but you might not get to actually pulling the book from the system for 1 or 2 weeks. And it's possible that maybe you aren't the one that pulls the books from the system. Maybe it's somebody in your tech services department. Putting these reading slips in here lets them know what your thought process was, why you're choosing to read the books, so that they kind of are on the same page as you are. So the last book that I'm going to pull for example is Myths and Civilization of Ancient Egypt. So now this book, it might be hard to tell in this video, but see these pages here. It looks like there's a little bit of water damage that happened with this book. We also have sort of some issues happening here in the spine at the top and at the bottom. So this book's had quite a bit of use. So when looking at the reading slip, I might in fact just mark this book as ugly. It just is. And what, with regards to ancient Egypt, I'm not sure about your collections at your own libraries, but typically we have a lot of books on ancient Egypt. So for example, I've got this book here, Egyptian Towns. It's newer, it's more modern, it's something that's going to be a bit more visually appealing. Voices of Ancient Egypt, also a newer, slightly more modern book, as well as Crafts of the Ancient World, Crafts and Cultures of the Ancient Egyptians. So this book here is supposed to give readers information on civilization, and here I've just pulled 3 books, one of which is from National Geographic, that are going to have the same information, if not more. And then also something that we always want to do when we're considering books for deletion is take a look at the copyright date. And this book is from 1998. So, and also actually when I opened it, I noticed that the pages here, see how it's a bit warped? So there's actually probably a good amount of water damage with this book as well. And because I know that not only do I have these 3 books on ancient Egypt, there are a plethora more, we can easily choose to let this one go. Let's go ahead and finish marking this up. So it's worn beyond repair because there's nothing that we can do about the water damage. And then pictures or format outdated. You know what, I'm not sure if the pictures and format are outdated, but the book is definitely old. Like it's old. We can, wow, there's actually a lot of water damage here. I can see and feel as I'm trying to bend and turn the page. So, while the pictures and or format might not necessarily be outdated, it's definitely warped. And what I might want to do here is write water damage. You know, and maybe add your initials to these too if there are multiple people in departments doing meetings, just so that if anyone wanted to contact you and kind of ask you what's going on, they'll know who it is. And I'm going to take this book and I'm also going to put it right here on my book cart. And this is the basic process for, you know, going through and weeding your materials and using the weeding slips. I hope this video was helpful, and we'll talk to you soon.
I hope you've enjoyed hearing from me after hearing from me on and off for the last 2 hours. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the presentation. Is it this one? No, that's not the right one. Here it is. Okay.
So Kim, if I can interject while you're getting back there, we didn't get any new questions in the chat yet, but I'm sure people are still thinking about them and they're going to type them in. But one of the things that I noticed in your video that continues to make an impression on me is that most of the books you pulled off the shelf look from the outside, from the cover, like they're probably okay. And I noticed this too as I was browsing down the shelves of our professional development collection, is that these books look like they're in great condition. But as I was weeding and looking at my spreadsheet with the publication date and the circulation numbers and all of that great information, and as I was pulling off the shelf, I realized either that the cover is misleading because maybe it's an indestructible cover and the inside has been destructed, or it looks gorgeous because no one has borrowed it in the past 20 years. So do not let that cover sway you to keep something just because it looks good, right? What you really want to be looking at is whether people are using those materials or not. And if they're not, let those materials go and move on and find something else that people will use instead.
And just so everyone knows, I made that video in 2020. So, some of those years, the 1998, right? Like that's counting back from 2020. So those are super old. So we had this really cute, Weed It and Reap, as well as the LibGuide website or the LibGuides link to get to the site with all of the notes, this recording, the slides, and basically every resource that was in the slideshow is then like on the page. And that's it. So Maria just dropped the evaluation link in the chat. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. And I know we asked if anyone had any other questions, but we'll ask again. I also know that sometimes questions are kind of intricate and hard to type. So if anyone would like to raise a hand and unmute themselves to ask a question that they couldn't quite figure out how to type out, we really want you all to walk out of here understanding and ready to hit, at least one shelf. So if anyone's still a little confused, please feel free to ask. There's no shame in the game.
And while you ponder what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, just to reassure everybody, at about 1 o'clock today, you're going to receive an email from Middletown Library Service Center that has all of the links in it. So it's going to have the master link that Kim showed us to where all these resources are, and it will include this evaluation link as well. And we love to hear from you guys in the evaluation because we often make changes to this presentation based on what you tell us. So it may be things that you thought were particularly strong that we want to continue to emphasize in the future, or it may be things that kind of didn't work for you or weren't clear, or like I said, somebody came back and said, wait, we use VHS. At one point we got a comment that says, you didn't tell me how to convince my staff to do this. And I was like, dude, that was the whole why section. So we're just changing our narrative sometimes to accentuate parts of the presentation that are helpful for you guys. So just give us your feedback in the evaluation form if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. The manga section didn't exist, but someone was like, hey, I got all this manga. The kids never stop reading it, so I don't know, but it's falling apart. What do I do? So we really do make adjustments. The same question that's maybe for the group, had to step away to cover lunch. Don't worry, you'll get the recording mic. Any 9 to 12 school librarians using Discover Books or other organizations to take fiction and nonfiction, that's been weeded. So feel free to drop something in the chat if that's something that you are doing. Mike, I'm not sure if you caught the portion where we talked a little bit about Baker and Taylor's sustainable shelves. They don't have to be books that you bought through Baker and Taylor. They will pulp to reuse any titles that they don't have a need for. So that's also another resource, as well as we have like a whole list. So if you did miss that section, don't worry. It's like 3 slides long. Of things to do with things that you need to get off your shelves. How do people deal with summer reading lists that have books on them which never circ even when on the list? Nope, delete them. And I'm saying this and I make the governor's summer reading list. Delete it. Some of that stuff is on there just because it's on there. So go ahead. I'm granting you permission, especially if it's from the governor's summer reading list. Does the Connecticut State Library offer consulting or assisting services in-house to assist with weeding? Call us. Sure. I don't know. Yeah.
We don't know. Pre-pandemic, the answer was sometimes yes. Post-pandemic, I don't know. But if there were demand, I don't know. Or pre-pandemic, we used to offer this workshop on site at certain libraries, and we would like bombard your collection with leaders. So that was an option.
Reach out, Claire, if that's something that you're really, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. There's no I in that name, so I'm really sorry if I said that wrong. Reach out and we'll talk about it. We'll talk to you about it. We'll talk to each other about it, and we'll talk to the person who is in charge of us about it.
I do remember Linda Williams many years ago got this call from a school librarian who was new to her school, and she walked in and she said, "Oh my gosh, my shelves are full. These books, to use a stereotype, literally are dusty. And I am completely overwhelmed. Can you please just come and like give me some guidance?" And Linda was actually able to get permission and go there and get her started. You know, obviously we don't have the time to weed your entire collection for you, but it was a really
weeded our own
opportunity.
entire collection
Years later, right? But Linda was able to give her some hands-on guidance initially to help her get started and to work her through some of those difficult decisions. And again, she said, you know, if I weed to the criteria you gave me, there's not going to be anything left. And again, I think Linda said that's okay. You know, it's better to have a collection that is accurate, that you can give to your students in confidence than to be giving them misinformation. So let the resource sharing programs and services work for you. Let the Middletown Library Service Center work for you. Let's all help each other out, right? Because we're all here together.
Weeding forever. I'm about the fourth of the way through my own nonfiction collection. God help us. So we feel your pain. We really do. We're doing this ourselves. We're making these tough decisions the same way you are. So absolutely reach out, go on the listservs, talk to each other, and we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. I feel like we have hit all the questions that are in the chat, and we are 4 minutes over our time. So I'm going to say thank you all for sticking with us for a solid 2 hours. Thank you for your feedback and your questions and your insight. We will be in touch with you.
Yeah, please fill out the survey. We read all of it, and we do make changes, like Maria said. So we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Go have lunch.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yes.